with a very good friend of mine called Charlie, and we were going back to his flat. And as we turned onto his street, everybody had put the rubbish bins out because it was bin day. The bin truck was coming down the road towards us, and it was all bin bags then. It wasn't wheelie bins. There were lots and lots of bin bags. And in the middle of all this mess, there was a cardboard box which was full of what were clearly old notebooks. And in fact, those old notebooks there.
Oh, that's them.
That's them. You know, that's most of them. There's 13 in total. And there were some letters, and there were some photographs and old Christmas cards. And the bin truck was coming, and it was all going to disappear. So Charlie and I picked it up and ran back to his flat and opened the box, and we had found someone's journals, a man called Dick Percival, and they start in 1925, and the last one finishes around about March 1976. So it's roughly 50 years of life, and it was an extraordinary discovery. He had an extraordinary life. He also had ambitions to be a writer, and so the journals are very engagingly written, and certainly the early journals seem as though he is writing them to be read by an audience. So they are extremely engaging, and Charlie and I kind of fell into them, and they were just fascinating.
That's 1998. Of course, it's 2020 now.
Isn't it just?
22 years.
Yes.
What took you on the what was your journey which brought you to creating a web series, which started on January 1st of this year? There have been 23 episodes, I think, so far.
I think so.
There's 4 more to go.
Yes.
So just give us some insight in terms of how you came to the idea that a web series was a really interesting and challenging way of presenting Dick's journals.
Well, I think when I found the journals, I was working in live theatre and dance and performance world. So when I found them, I didn't feel there was anything that I wanted to do with them immediately. I mean, I tried a couple of things, but I felt there was nothing I could do with them particularly. So then there was 20 years of my practice changing from live dance and theatre through to a screen dance practice, which is where I first would have met you. Yes. Because you were very connected with screen dance, which kind of had a little kind of explosion of interest in Brighton in the early beginning of this century. Yeah. And so that moved me out of theatre into screen, and then I began to reject all notions of wanting to invent things. So I didn't want to invent anything. I didn't want to invent dances or stories. I wanted to find things, and so that moved me into a documentary practice. Mm-hmm. But still very much connected with dance and very much connected with my particular interest, which is about choreography. And choreography, as I define it, is the organization of movement in time and space. And so in screen time and space, my passion has always been sort of using choreography as a way to take people through documentaries and documentary stories. So I'd moved that far, and then I was involved in the curation of some festivals, and one of those festivals was called What Matters, and it was about trying to find connecting threads between very different disciplines and types of work to see if we could find a journey that would connect dance to writing, to sound, to photography. And while we were doing this and bringing works together, I suddenly remembered the diaries. And there was something about this question of what matters and these diaries. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I put them on show that year. That would have been about 2012 in this exhibition, just on a table with a couple of comfy chairs, really just to see if anybody else would be interested in them. And lots of people were interested in them, and some people got very interested in them because, you know, once you get used to his writing and his way of writing, it's quite, you know, they're quite a page turner.
Mhm.
So some people, go
Right.
on.
No, I'm just going to kind of just think, just moving towards a web series,
Yeah,
which is a very distinctive form.
it is.
Because you could have gone down a more familiar route of taking all that source material and creating a, you know, your, if you like, a biography using his voice.
Yeah.
And you could have told the story with the journals as a kind of, I don't know, as a resource, as a kind of backbone. But you chose not to do that, instead to create a web series. So why did you go down that route?
Because I don't want to invent things.
Huh.
I don't want to invent anything. So one of the big unlocking of the project for me was finding the voice of Dick Percival. And that was the performer, Gerard Bell, who first read those diaries at that festival. And someone else said to me, oh, Gerard Bell, he'd be good as, you know, Dick Percival. And that totally unlocked something for me, because it was the finding of the right voice that made me go, oh, now I can make something. And it still took a few years of me going, but I don't want to invent anything. I don't want anybody acting. I don't want anybody. And then on other projects, I'd begun to work with found footage. And then it was literally 2017, in the middle of a sunny afternoon, I suddenly went, oh, found footage diaries. And then in terms of the web series, that all arrived on that afternoon as well, of, oh, well, you just released the films on the day they were written, and then that's a series. And so it arrived with me in that moment after 22 years of shifting and changing. There was just a moment where it went, oh, of course it's that's what it is. And I know what the voice sounds like. And now all I need to do is find the footage and find a way to deliver the story. And it is the episodic nature of a web series that I really enjoy, because Dick in his writing has a great sense of drama, and he's almost, in his diaries, a bit of a master of a cliffhanger. And so there were all kinds of episodes where he ends with, what now? Or I wonder, or if only, or yes, I've never felt more lonely. Yes. And there was something about the way he would end these things that sort of provided this shape for cliffhangers. Yes. Wanting to spread the story out to engage people across a period of time.
But also too, with and I think it's particularly noticeable dealing with the war years, and when he kind of moves, when it's employed at Bletchley Park,
yep.
Is that there are gaps,
yes,
in his journal, which
yes.
I think, and why I find that particularly interesting is that with a more traditional kind of filmmaking, if you call yourself a filmmaker, more good, but because dealing with either, you know, filling in the gaps, so imagining what he was doing at Bletchley Park,
yeah.
or allowing the gaps to stand, so that if you like, mysteries get built in,
yes,
to it, instead of filling in all the gaps.
Yes, and you know, there were long periods in those 50 years where he didn't write, so yes. There would be large blocks. And interestingly, for those who haven't followed the series, he has a very disastrous first marriage with a woman who probably takes a lot of his attention. And during those years, and that's 23 years, he barely writes at all. So there are massive gaps where I have no idea what his life was like. And then something will change. So in this case, his first wife died, and he really started writing again on a almost daily basis. So those gaps do have to stand, because I don't know. I've tried to just for my own curiosity, fill in some of those gaps by going to Bletchley Park, or by visiting the house that he was brought up in, to stand in the hallway and, you know, feel the kind of sense of what his life might have been like there, you know. So, and I've spoken to a couple of people who knew Dick Percival, and they have sort of been able to fill in gaps, but they also, you know, I know in some ways a lot more than they do.
Yes, yes, because you, in terms of just, you did seek out a relative or more relatives just to ensure that you could proceed with the project, didn't you?
Yes, yes, because I don't legally, although the journals were thrown away, I don't have the right to use them, even though they were discarded. The copyright rests with Dick Percival for 70 years.
That's right, yes.
After his death. So yes, the material is still under copyright, and then that's passed down through the family. And Dick didn't have any children, so there was no easy route, really, although his sister had children. But finding exactly who these people were, and there were grandchildren as well from the sisters. And the family has now quite a common surname. They're not Percival. And the Christian names are quite, you know, common British names. So I was writing to everybody on Facebook with that name to say, are you Diana Percival's granddaughter? But so it took a long time to find the family, but I did eventually locate one of the granddaughters who has spoken to other members of her family, and, you know, kind of had to take the risk to go, will you let me do it? Because I'm a complete stranger. I've just got in touch with you out of the blue to tell you that I have these incredibly personal family papers, and also that I want to make them really public. And I was very fortunate that the person that I spoke to is an artist herself. She's an arts photographer, and so she was very willing for me to have a go.
Right. I've just received a question which I'd like to ask you.
Excellent.
And it comes from Robin. And Robin asks, do you now feel part of his family, given that you know him so well?
I think that's really interesting. I don't know if I feel a part of his family, but I do sort of feel almost that he's a part of mine, because there is this extraordinary thing about knowing someone so well and yet not at all. I don't know him at all. And, you know, interesting things from speaking to the people who did know him, the voice of Gerard, which I went, oh, yes, that's right for Dick Percival. They've told me his voice was nothing like Gerard's at all. So it's really interesting. You know, I have my idea of a man based on what he wrote in books, some of which I think he would have been happy, or at the time that he wrote them, he thought they'd be published because he thought he'd be a great man. But, you know, towards the end of the journals, they are very personal diaries. He no longer thinks that he's going to be published or they're going to be used. So I have a very particular view of this person that's from the inside of his head. And it's a very odd way to know someone and to feel that you know someone. I think for people who actually did know him, I have spoken to one of his friends, and I think she cannot watch the series because she is quite shocked by how depressed he sounds.
Right.
And she didn't think of him as a depressed man at all. He was a very jolly man who was, you know, outgoing and fun and liked a good laugh and liked to be very social. But of course, the diary is a very different world where you moan in a diary, and you know, struggle, and you try to work out your place in the world.
And it's private.
And it's private.
And that's the other interesting thing, because I'm very conscious, for example, with working with a film archive collection, films which are made for personal reasons. They're about a family's life. There could be many, many different subjects. But no, the filmmaker, her himself, would never have imagined in the future that material being used, being shared, being used, finding its way into your web series.
Yes. Well, yes, it does. And, you know, I also feel that there are certain, because I am using some of the footage, the home movie footage that I use comes from Screen Archive Southeast. And there's one collection, which is the Eric Norman collection. And in the Eric Norman collection, I don't know if it is actually Eric Norman, but there's a guy who, he's perfect for Dick Percival. You know, he's a little bit thin and he wears glasses and he's a little bit balding and he smokes. And there, you've got various films from that family in your collection. So not only do I feel like I have some kind of strange familial relationship with Dick Percival, but I'm starting to feel a bit of a familial relationship with Eric Norman, simply because I'm looking at his family footage so much to try and rebuild something of Dick Percival's world.
Yeah, but I find it really intriguing that you have the journals, you had your performer, Gerard Bell,
yes,
who becomes Dick, also to Scott Smith, sound designer.
yes.
But of course, when you started, you didn't know what archive content you were going to use,
No.
or what you could find, what you could get access to. So you know, you set quite a big problem for yourself.
Yeah. It's been quite a year.
Yes.
But, you know, the footage is out there. It is out there, and it might not be, you know, I use footage for different reasons. I use footage to illustrate something almost quite literally, and I will use footage that will act as a metaphor for something, and I will use footage for color or texture or movement, and I will loop footage and stretch footage, and I will use split screen techniques. One of the things that I've enjoyed about working with Screen Archive Southeast is that I pay a very reduced fee because of your support of this project per second. But you told me I could use that second that I paid for as often as I wanted. So I stretch them and I loop them, and I can twist them and play with them, and I can hold little moments, and that 1 second of footage can become 10 or 20 seconds of kind of play.
Yeah, fantastic. I have 2 more questions.
Jolly good.
Good. One from Miriam, and she asks, what percentage of the journals have you used so far in the series?
Hardly any, Miriam.
Really?
Hardly any. Honestly, when I started, you know, I got the idea that when I'll start by, you know, Dick Percival decides the order of the web series because it's based on when he wrote them. So I thought what I'll do is I'll go through the journals, I transcribe the journals, and then I'll just pull out the really obvious episodes that absolutely have to be there because they're fabulous or fascinating, or they contain wonderful social history. And then, you know, I'll see how many that is, and then I'll fill in around that. And by the time I pulled out every single episode I wanted to make a film out of, I had something, I think initially it was 84 episodes of stuff that I thought was fabulous. And, you know, at the end of this, there will be 27 episodes made. So really, you know, I've skimmed the surface in this of the super fascinating, dramatic, eventful stuff. But then there's a whole other world in there, which is about the mundane, sort of the really mundane aspects of life that he also writes about, that can give really interesting insights into life. And there hasn't been room for those in this kind of version of it. But certainly in the future, I love those. I love those little tender moments where you realize that what someone is writing about is their sort of middle-class angst. And they're worried about what other people think of them because they wonder if they've bought the wrong carpet or not. You know, those little kind of niggly stories that can go on for days in Dick Percival's writing are just totally mundane, but really fascinating.
I have another question from Stephen. Stephen says, I enjoyed how Dick Percival's bemusement at Serena's diaries at the end of the film parallels the viewer's attempts to interpret the partial details in his journals.
Yes.
And then he goes on to say, I prefer not to know what happened in Singapore, but wondered whether Becky Edmonds does know.
Oh, I don't know what happened in Singapore.
Oh.
And that is because I have theories of what happened in Singapore. There is a mystery, there is a diary missing. In 1935, Dick Percival got a job in Singapore with the Singapore Straits Times. He was writing in a notebook as he's on the boat, and he finishes that notebook with, he's halfway through telling a story about one of the passengers on that boat. And he writes at the bottom of the page, the very bottom of the page, he writes, "To be continued in next volume." And I don't have that next volume. But in that time, in that book definitely exists because he refers to it in the future. So he always talks about the fateful events in Singapore that forever changed his relationship with Serena. Fateful. So yes, he refers to it. He says he wrote about it all at the time, but I don't have that story. But I do know that he went to Singapore. I do know that Serena, who had just divorced her second husband, showed up. I do know that her second son was there as well. She had 3 sons from her first marriage. And I do think that something happened in which Dick Percival lent her son a large sum of money, around about £150 then, which is about £15,000 now. And somewhere in all of that is the story of what happened in Singapore. But I am looking for that journal. I'd love to know what happened in Singapore.
I have a question from Louise. What do you hope will happen with the journals in the future?
Well, the journals belong to the family. The family did not throw them away. This is another mystery, is that the journals were not found where Dick lived. They were found sort of on the other side of Brighton, and they were found a year after his death. And they weren't thrown out by the family. The person who would have cleared the house was his nephew, and his nephew was sort of the keeper of the family archive. And his nephew knew that Dick Percival had worked at Bletchley Park as well, and would not have thrown away any diary that would have detailed anything about that sort of history. So it wasn't the family. So when I did manage to contact the family, the woman was really kind of surprised. She knew that there were journals, but she never knew what had happened to them. So yes, they will when I'm done. I mean, I need to get back in touch with the family at the end of this. I feel like I'm not quite done yet, but the agreement is that they will return to the family because they were kind of lost by.
Oh, right,
yeah.
right. There's another question. This is from Marissa. Can you talk about the close-ups? I was struck today by you placing Dick in the movie of his life.
The close-ups. Oh, Marisa, can you give a little more? Placing Dick within. Can you repeat that bit?
Placing Dick in the movie of his life.
Yes, you see, there's a couple of things. One thing that was said earlier, that Gerard Bell becomes Dick Percival. Gerard decided very early on that he actually isn't playing Dick Percival. He is just reading the diaries, which is a kind of important distinction. It removes any idea of acting, for instance, and it does deliver quite a dry, unemotional delivery. And then the people that pass through the film,
yes,
who, you know, it might be one person representing Dick for an episode, there might be 10 people representing Dick for an episode. You know, Serena will shift and change throughout the series and sometimes throughout an episode as to who these people are. And I don't actually think of them as concretely representing Dick or Serena. They're other people who could be Dick or Serena. Anybody could be Dick or Serena. This is just someone's life. It could be anybody's life. And actually, interestingly, you know, on Twitter, I got a great thing. I don't know if this person is here, but someone watched the trailer. And at the beginning of the trailer, it has the address of where he lived in Hove. And this person lived next door to Dick and Sheila when Dick and Sheila were living there. So that person was watching a film and realized, oh, those people live next door to me, that man with that complex life. And so there's something about not even putting Dick in the film. These are just faces that can represent him, or it sort of feels less concrete to me than
but there are references. Marissa qualified by saying, you know, she's actually referring to the movie star close-ups.
Oh yes.
And it's just not those close-ups are actually of actual movie stars.
They are.
You know, thinking of Greta Garbo.
Oh yes, Greta.
So there's a whole other set of referencing which you've chosen to bring in.
Yes, there is. There is. For me, Dick's journals and writings fall into sort of different, it's like a sort of spectrum between his sort of complete romanticism and fantasy world of his youth. I mean, he was an enormously privileged young man who had no idea about what real life was like. And his head was full of ideas of romanticism and love. And Serena, when he met her, was a goddess. And I can't imagine using home movie footage for that representation, his representation of Serena in that moment. For him, I mean, Greta Garbo has done me a great service in this film. She appears as Serena a lot, and she is there to represent that completely kind of over-romantic view that he had of her. He thought she was a goddess. And so, and he also said that she looked like Greta Garbo, which is helpful. And so Garbo, you know, she provides me with this marvelous kind of, this is Serena as Dick saw her. And then as the story goes forward in time and Serena begins to reveal herself, only, I should say, through his eyes. I have no idea what Serena was like. I imagine she was great fun. But, you know, I only see his view of her. And as his view of her comes much closer to the reality of her, so the footage of her will shift and change. And yeah, if he's really dealing with the absolute reality of what it's like to deal with Serena, then I will look for home movie footage. I also use, there's some screen test footage that I use of Greta Garbo when she was older. And, you know, that's just her very beautiful, but quite relaxed and sort of laughing at the camera. She's not acting. And that's nice material to try and show that Serena wasn't the monster that Dick portrays her as. She was a whole human being in herself with her own complications. But I'm using the different types of footage to try and represent these fleeting glimpses of this woman in the way that I feel like Dick was seeing her at the time.
Which of course goes against the grain of, even though people like Buñuel, even David Lynch have used different actors to represent the same character. It's that sense of, you know, constant shifting, understanding, shifting feelings, and therefore represented by different figures.
Yeah.
There's another question from Miriam, which takes us to another place, but it's very interesting. And you know, you could refer to like the materiality of the journals, you know, and she's of course interested in the calligraphy or indeed the handwriting, because you've chosen to actually bring
Yes.
actual pages
Yes.
they're integrated
Yes.
into your series. And just to think about that, and also to the different uses of pens, because it's from fountain pen to biro.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And how his writing changes over the years, his writing in his younger diaries, it really is the writing of a young boy. And then you see that writing mature, both in the kind of the actual writing, but also with that in what he's writing about. It took me some time to get used to his writing, but once I did, it becomes like the writing of a family member, and that, to show the writing on screen, I will use that in different ways as well. Sometimes I will leave some on screen with not much else going on, just to allow people to read stuff for themselves. But there's information in there. There is the type of pen, there's the sort of paper, the quality of the note paper, all those things that I really love. I can also, when I open some of the journals, I can still smell tobacco. And I don't know if that's his tobacco. And there's also little bits sometimes of where you can see tobacco burns in the paper. And I don't know if that's from him or from me. From when I was smoking, when I was first reading them. So there's all these kind of interesting, the texture of stuff. And it's important for me. That is Dick. That is the thing that is Dick. Everything else is a sort of fleeting ghost. But that is him, and the few photographs and real images of the real people that I've managed to find.
I don't think we have any more questions, so I'll just have one final question.
Okay.
Which is just for you. I'd like you to reflect on the differences between the web series and making the compilation for Amplify.
Yes, it's been very interesting to put the material together. For Amplify, I wanted to see what it was like to put it in chronological order, to select some episodes, and to try and, the thread through it really is his love life. It's from his first girlfriend through his first wife to his sort of happier marriage circumstance in his second marriage. And putting them together, this is a compilation. This is not a feature film. This is a compilation of web episodes. And the timing, I think, is very intense, actually, as a feature-length experience. I think it is about episodes. And these episodes, they are designed for people to kind of be at the bus stop, see it pop up on Facebook and go, oh, I've got 5 minutes. I'll watch it on my phone, on my headphones. They're little bursts of activity and then it goes away again. To put them all together, it's a bit of an onslaught. But it was, I had about a week and a half to do it. So, but it feels at the moment what's being shown at Amplify feels like a very sort of tight muscle at the moment. And I kind of want to get in and give it a bit of a massage and spread it out a bit. But it was a really interesting experiment, and I want to go further with it as well. I do think that there's ways to return to this material and have different form. Yeah.
Interesting. And of course, as ever, the idea it's something, it's never finished.
No.
It's always going to grow and expand. One last question popped in, which I think you'll find interesting. Was there anything you found in the journals which you found difficult to use on other ethical or moral grounds, given the historical context, indeed the decades which they cover?
Yes, absolutely. Lots of stuff that, I feel I have a responsibility to Dick Percival. Dick Percival was born in a totally different age. He was, my feeling from reading his journals is that he was a product of his time, but he was a good man. And so the time he was brought up in, there's there's stuff that nowadays reads as misogyny, for sure. Back then, he wouldn't have, I think that it was a totally different world. And I don't believe he was misogynist. I think he was brought up in a misogynist culture, but I think he as a man was a good man. And my responsibility is to kind of represent him in this time in a way where he could look at it and go, yeah, all right, from this place now, from 2020, which is so different to 1925. And then in the later journals, Dick himself says, I become much more interested in other people as I get older, and he starts to detail other people's lives in much more detail. And that's a different arrangement, because those people, I don't know if they're alive still. I don't know who their families are. And so when you get into a little bit of scandal about someone who might have family or might still be alive, then absolutely, I don't want to go anywhere near there. I do know Dick had no children. Serena had children, but they didn't have any children. There's no surviving relatives. So absolutely, there's stuff because of, and there's stuff. Well, this has been a really interesting one for me. His second wife, Sheila, suffered from diabetes. And he used to write about that in such a way, because she never liked to talk about it. He didn't like to write about it in his journal. And so there's these sort of quite moving little things about, you know, Sheila had a funny turn in St. Anne's Well Park. And he writes very movingly, but sort of without ever really saying what it is. And there was an episode of that was very interesting. And in the end, I went, you know what? Sheila didn't want people to know. I have to respect. I mean, I've just told you all, but I'm not putting it in the film. Yeah. So yes, there have been things that I would not use. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think very good point to end on, because it's just not, when we engage with it, whatever ways, with real lives and real people, and also too, when we're using copyrighted material like archive content, it's just, it's a delicate place.
Yes.
And it's you end up having to engage with kind of questions you didn't even realize you would have to when you began.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's why some people kind of like working with, creating fictional worlds which are far away from our own, and there's no resemblance with the living or the dead.
Yes.
But we choose to take on
kind
of these responsibilities and handle them as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would at this point just want to give a massive shout out to my collaborators, Gerard Bell and Scott Smith, who have, it says Becky Edmonds, director there. I'm the project director, not the film director. I don't direct those collaborators. They bring their brilliance to me fully formed. And I just want to really thank them for all they've done for this work.
Thank you, Becky, for being with us.
Thank you.
Sharing your insights into To Be Continued, which you can continue, those who are watching today, you can continue to watch To Be Continued until the end of the Amplify Film Festival on the 22nd of November. And of course, we have many other great things to see. Films, shorts, and other Q&As are coming up between now and the 22nd.